I'm Paul Ingbretson. I'm a full-time artist and a teacher of painting. I also served as a New Hampshire state representative for 6 terms beginning in 2003. I'm one of a number of concerned citizens, including other former and current New Hampshire state legislators, who are very concerned about the unprecedented usurpation of legislative authority by our Supreme Court in the now infamous Claremont decisions of 1993 and 1997. We've come together to produce a series of podcasts that will lay out the facts and evidence for your consideration. We'll be hearing from some of the best legal minds in our state who have followed the issue from the beginning. Our goal is to create public awareness of the serious separation of powers implications of the Claremont decisions, with the hope of generating active public resistance to it and to any future such judicial overreach. Hey, we're back, and I think you already know what we're going to be talking about today, but it's going to be a strange introduction because of who my guest is today. So just tolerate this for a second. I probably should have had Mr. Producer put it up online, but I'm going to read you a quote that I found in one of my guest's books today, and it fits perfectly into the Claremont thing. I don't know what you mean by glory, Alice said. Humpty Dumpty smiled contemptuously. Of course you don't, till I tell you. I meant there's a nice knockdown argument for you. But glory doesn't mean a nice knockdown argument, Alice objected. When I use a word, Humpty Dumpty said in rather a scornful tone, it means just what I choose it to mean, and neither more nor less. The question is, said Alice, whether you can make words mean so many different things. The question is, said Humpty Dumpty, which is to be master? That's all. So with that, let me introduce my guest, who is the author of a whole bunch of fun books here, and a lot more than this, I guess, right now, that I've actually had the delight of reading. But I'll introduce you to his books, but I want to tell you who he is in my version of just fast reading, okay, because it goes on and on. But your background is Purdue. You're a BS in math, computer science. You're a planetary scientist at NASA, and at Northwestern, you got an MS in learning. And your wife just told me I'm tempted to say the things you just said about what it means to have these letters behind your name. In the learning sciences, artificial intelligence, and then NASA again, Ames and his AI research branch.
Right.
And what's the Dr. Math thing? I saw that there was something online or something.
So Dr. Math was something that was started at Swarthmore College, and it was a website where anybody could write in with any question about math at any level. Anything from a kid trying to figure out how to add 2 fractions to somebody trying to prove a theorem or build a house or whatever.
Right.
We didn't care. So we had a bunch of volunteers.
Right.
Not everybody showed up all the time, but hundreds of volunteers, and I managed it. And what we tried to do was use those questions as a starting point, not to just say, here's the answer to your question, but to get you to see the world a little more the way a mathematician sees it.
Yeah.
So we would be like, well, this is a more specific case of this more general question, or have you ever considered this, or whatever. And we would try to essentially get into conversations.
So you?
It was
Mr.
me and
Matthew?
these volunteers.
Yeah.
And it was all done over email. So if you had the question, you would go to our site and you would type in your question, and then we would go through, use medical terminology. We would go to triage and go, what are the most important and interesting questions?
Yeah.
And you would choose what you wanted to answer.
And this was video.
No, it was all text. It was all email.
Wow.
This is email. This was going on
Back a ways.
back a ways. Yeah, I did that for like
Well,
20
so Dr.
years.
Math is Ian Underhill.
Underwood.
Underwood. My neighbors are all Underhills around here. We get wood from the Underhills. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, I apologize.
No problem.
What do I know about my guest? Yeah. Except that we had a nice time chatting the other day and got to know you.
That's what's important.
Well, the other part of what you're doing is you have this thing called bare minimum books that are coming out with sub-subjects as the rules of law. And Article 14, what did you say about Article 14? How the 14th Amendment ate the first 10. I mean, this is important reading, in my view, right?
Thank you. Yeah.
And so rethinking fairness in education, this is right on our topic for today, and so on. And, I could read the whole list. I guess I won't, but I'm going to go ahead and use some of your quotes in here as a takeoff point for us, because this one really, and I only read this morning. I mean, I think I read it before, but this morning I looked at it thinking I hadn't read this, and I was reading it like I was actually listening still.
Yeah.
Instead of how you do sometimes when the second reading comes up. You start scanning. But here you say, you talk about laws saying what they say. And you say, what I'm trying to illustrate here is that we've reached the point where there's no longer possible, even in theory, to write a law that simply means what it says. We're talking about the most fundamental thing about Claremont is these guys are just making crap up.
Right.
And they're claiming it means something, but
right.
we don't read it as meaning that.
Right, but
you're making a point here.
Yeah, but nobody bothers to read it because we've all been told that we can't possibly understand it.
So we don't even bother.
We don't even bother.
Well,
so
if they
nobody
say so, I believe it. That settles it. Okay.
I could count on one hand maybe the number of times I asked somebody, so have you looked at Article 83, which all this is based on? And they're like, no, as if, not like, no, I never got around to it, but like, no, why would I? That's what we have the court for, right?
Yeah.
And so you look at something like that as a fifth grader and it says like, there's an inherent and essential right to free and fair competition in the trades and industries. Yeah. It actually names a right, an inherent and essential right. Not just like the right to free speech or the right to keep and bear arms, but inherent and essential. Right. And then it says it's the state's job to protect that right against things like monopolies and conspiracies. And it's like, that's pretty clear. Yeah. But it's been turned completely on its head. And so the court has said, well, and this is where the Lewis Carroll, it's just, it's amazing how well he has described the U.S. legal system, because they go, well, what that actually means is we have to set up a monopoly, right, to hinder, to get rid of competition in education. Yeah. And it's like
what, really?
Yeah, really? So this is the thing. And so, I just...
you'd have to develop that. I'm going to go over most people's heads, so for sure. But you made your point in that first part. Let me go to the second one, and I'm just going to do these. It's sort of hit and run. Just it'll give people an idea who you are, and the reading of this thing is significant. And therefore, this is a follow-up on this previous one. And therefore, it's no longer possible for a citizen to be able to know what a law says by just by reading it.
Right. Which
this is your theme.
This is the thing that has been bugging me.
A book called The Rules of Law, by the way.
It's bugging me for the longest time. And the very first time that I, got into this and went to give testimony, I was just like, okay, you look at this and it says all persons have the right to keep and bear arms. So anybody just reading this would go, are you a person? Then you can have a gun. Right. But you can't do that. And so, my thing is like, suppose you set out, and this is the thing I sent you this.
You talked about the rape thing. Yeah.
But also the video I sent you about like, to just go in front of a judge and say, what would I have to do to write a law that you couldn't just twist completely out of shape? Yeah. What would I have to say something like? Yeah. Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of speech. Like, should we add, and we really mean it? I mean, what could you do? Yeah, and the rape example that I really like, where you could, I mean, you want to...
Except when you feel like, no, let's not go there.
Let's not go there.
No, but the point is that the courts are in the process of dismantling the Constitution by saying what it means, by telling us what it must mean, what they decide it must mean now. Making it a piece of rubber or worse than rubber jello.
And this is exactly, you see this over and over, even at the level of, Congress will pass a law, or the state will pass a law, and everybody will start panicking because some news outlets told them this is what the law... Give you an example from the last day. Oh, Trump has canceled the Department of Education. It's like, no, he actually didn't. If you go and read his executive order, it actually says we will take all steps towards that we can. But he didn't do it, but nobody's going to read the order. Yeah. Right? Nobody reads the law. Yeah, right.
Yeah. Well, so there's a media factor and all this stuff, but that's another story.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
yes.
Absolutely, right. Yeah. So in the next point here, this is addressed to the court, right? And this whole thing, keep remembering, guys, what we're talking about here is what somebody in the previous videos have called usurpation. Somebody called it fraud. Somebody else called it a hoax. We're talking about the New Hampshire Supreme Court with names being attached to them like that. I mean, it's pretty serious stuff.
It is. Yeah, and I call it waking hypnotic suggestion.
Yeah, well, that's the whole media thing that a lot of us are finally awake to. Yeah, in one sense,
Right. If I just keep telling you over and over, there's a constitutional right to an education, and I just keep saying it, and you hear everybody else saying it, eventually everybody runs around and goes, oh, there's a constitutional right, and then they can chastise the legislature for not living up to, giving this constitutional right. And it's like, but it's not there. Yeah. There's no there. There's nothing there. So yes, this is where we are, and they have built this up. My thesis is they have done this deliberately, and they've had 200 years to do it.
By the way, you're with Sorg on saying that, by the way. He was asked that question specifically, probably by you.
Yeah.
He says, was this deliberate or was it not? He says he believes it was. Rich says give these guys the benefit of the doubt. They mean well.
No, I totally believe this is deliberate, starting with Marbury versus Madison, and it's just like, it means whatever we say it means.
Well, Jefferson thought they meant it.
And nobody objects, it just, So I think it's deliberate, and I think it's clever. I think it's, there's a certain evil genius behind it.
Yes.
So, but this is where it's gotten us. If I write down a law, there is no way, because we have said the courts are allowed to redefine the words. No doesn't mean no. All doesn't mean all.
Well, in my past, I've read Rudolf Flesch in this book called The Art of Clear Thinking. This is who Ian Underwood makes me think of immediately, is that book. But we are really so direly in need of some clear thinking around here, and stop having this confusion. Is the necessity of creating confusion and plausibility instead of actuality and specificity. It's like astonishing to me.
Right. Yeah.
And when the courts come out with it, when they start talking that way, then we have a serious problem.
Yes, we do, and the problem is that everybody, like I said, has been conditioned to this. You just think, if they say it, then it must be true, right?
Let's go to your third point. Just enjoying your book.
All right.
You all want to read this book. How do they get it? They get it by going online. How would they ever get a book
at
like
bareminimumbooks.com, or they can go to Amazon and just look up. Me.
Oh, and by the way, I was supposed to say my wife is going to kill you if you don't say.
Right. I was going to say that my wife will kill me because I tend to forget.
My wife won't kill you.
No.
No, but Granite Grok, your relationship to them, you should. That's an interesting thing. I've sent the videos over. I think they're probably putting them somewhere and they're linking it somewhere. But I didn't know you had what your connection was to them. Or did you create it? Were you part of creating Granite Grok?
No. It was already there, and at some point I ran into Steve and Skip, who run it, and they saw something I wrote, and they said you should write more for us. And and they're great. They're just like, because I don't always agree with them. And in fact, my running joke with Skip is, he'll be like, Ian makes my head hurt, but in a good way, right? Because I will say things, and he will I don't want this
to be true.
True. But it is. Yeah. No, so what am I supposed to do? So they've been wonderful because they're conservatives. I'm a mathematician is what I am, and so I write this stuff.
I'm glad you didn't say libertarian. I really like that.
So I write this stuff, and whether they agree with it or not, they're like, say what you want to say.
Yeah.
And so they've been great, and so I didn't have to make up a website. I don't have to do anything. I just go and I write something. And I put it in WordPress.
No, I like a so to speak, a paper, a news source where the conversation is obviously independent, not cloned, and not whatever bought in.
Yeah.
You get as Candace Owens getting thrown out because she doesn't toe this exact whatever thing. I like that.
Yeah.
There's an element of
and
that.
they're great about that. You can disagree with them, and they are not going to censor you. They are not going to tell you can't say something. They want to hear what you have to say.
Is your life safe now? Are you going to be okay?
Yeah.
Get her free. Get her ride home. She knows I'm kidding. Maybe she
No, this is great. It's just I tend to not market myself.
Yeah.
I will just talk about the ideas, and then later
me
she's
too.
like, you should have said where to get the books. And I'm like,
well,
yes,
I do student critiques in painting. And I have to sometimes tell people, I don't care about you. It's not about you.
Yeah,
it's just about the ideas. I don't care about you. I wouldn't be helping you. But it's just the ideas. My intensity is only there because these ideas are fascinating and fascinating.
Yeah, and
these are more than fascinating. They're hugely important because this is about our liberties. And this is about whether we are sovereigns in our own sovereign nation, nation of sovereign individuals. It matters. It's humanity.
They do, and I'm trying to drag people's attentions back to the roots of things.
Well, which gets you right under the skin, hopefully, of 4 men in black dresses, 5 men in black dresses. Sorry, you didn't say that. You may have said that.
Secular popes, yes.
Yeah, secular popes.
They're infallible.
So this is, I wrote the words to the court here. I have no idea where I wrote it, so I'm going to let you have this one. And by the way, I'm doing this so he has a chance to have a little bit of a platform with things he's already said, because he's even only here because of what I've heard him say. And you understand, I'm speaking to the viewer. So you have to come up with just the right wording, and then you have to convince a lot of people that the change is necessary, and then you have to think about all the statutes that might be affected, and you have to do a lot of paperwork. You're talking about the amendment process.
Yes, it's hard.
Why can't the courts get it right with just doing amendments right instead of doing them by interpretation.
Well, here's the thing. Even if they were to do it, the amendment in writing,
right.
If they were just to get out the pen and say, we're now putting in before all persons, we're saying all law-abiding persons.
Right.
If they would do that and even claim the power to do it in writing, that would be something you could at least address.
You can work with this, yeah.
But they're just saying from now on, when we say persons,
right.
we don't actually mean persons. We mean persons who haven't been convicted of something or who have reached a certain age or who have filled out the right paperwork or whatever.
Yeah.
And so this is what I mean, to go
so
back
we don't
for a
get to read the
minute.
Constitution. I mean, persons means persons.
You literally can't read that and know what it means because you have to ask a judge. Whoa, we didn't mean that.
Yeah.
You know? And so this is the amendment process is this oral thing where they make it up and they solve.
Oh, they love the president thing,
Yeah,
don't they? Just
they
make
all
it up
sort
as
of
they go.
understand what it is. But yeah, it's
And they're all
for
buddies
me.
in their little system.
Yeah, if I'm the Martian, right, and I come down and I'm reading the rule book, it's like, what? This has nothing to do with what's happening.
So, but what's interesting though is that even these guys, with all their whatever you want to call it, some kind of erudition, training, have an incapacity to work. They don't want to do the job. That is all the work it's going to take to make a proper amendment and take it through the people and all that sort of stuff. It strikes me as being beyond corrupt. It's lazy as hell.
It is. It is lazy. And what you're doing is you're taking a process that was supposed to be difficult. Because and that, in somewhere I use an example of, Ulysses tied to the mast. And like that's what a constitution and a Bill of Rights is. It's like you're going by and you're screaming, let me go over there, let me go over there. And they all have the wax in their ears and they sail on, right? Yeah. And that's how this is supposed to work. And if you want to go over there, it should be a lot of trouble. You should have to convince a lot of people. You should have to do a lot of paperwork. You should have to have a huge discussion and not just go in front of 5 guys who go, yeah, from now on, a public school monopoly is a monopoly.
My wife's a school teacher. My daughter's a school teacher.
But that's where we are, right? Is that that it is laziness.
Yeah.
And it's something worse than laziness. It's, I don't know. What's worse than laziness?
We agree with that.
It's a sin.
Well, but now it's sloth in a bad cause. They haven't even thought it through in the sense of don't they care about their own or their children's future?
Well, so the judges, I think, are just, people are coming to them and say, please just do this, right? It's the legislature I blame.
Okay.
Right? And it's the people I blame for just saying it's so much easier to get a judge or 3 judges out of 5 to say this thing and then we win.
We leaned on that in the last show. We definitely were there.
That is so much
disagree.
That is so much simpler to do that and just short circuit this whole process.
Yeah.
But the process is there for a reason.
Yeah.
And we're ignoring that.
No, we as citizens have inherited a contract with the government. It's called the Constitution. Yeah. We accept that on some level, whether we like it or not somewhat. But the point is, it is the only contract we have. We don't have a contract with these judges to change the words and then think we still have a contract.
Right. But even then, as a contract, it's sort of interesting because it's more about what you can't do than what you can do.
Yeah, or what they can do.
It's like if we have a contract and we're mostly agreeing on like, I won't do this to you and I won't do this to you.
Yeah, that's true.
Not I will do this or I'll paint your house. It was I won't paint your house unless you tell me I can, right? What kind of contract is that? So I'm always a little leery of that.
Well, we just word agreement is fine. I don't mind. I mean, we're on it though, and you and I are standing here. Or maybe I can't tell you how much you're that guy because of what I read. I have some interesting speculations, but we all significantly, most people involved in the discussion have sworn an oath to it and all that junk. And I'm talking about being state reps and those sorts of things.
Although, I mean, and I wrote something about
Have you ever read it? I know.
But it's just what they're actually swearing to is to do whatever the courts tell them to.
And that's what it comes down to.
And I wrote it like an amended oath. This is what I'm actually promising. I promise to do whatever.
What book is that in? We'll recommend it right here on the spot.
I don't think it's in a book. That's just on Grok.
Okay.
I wrote something about that where it was just,
So we're recommending they go to Grok. If you went to Grok, where would it show up? How would they find it?
So what you can do is
it's called Granite Grok.
GraniteGrok.com.
Okay.
And you search for Ian Underwood, and you'll once you get any of my articles, you can then there's a listing, and you can get all of them. And this was just I wrote it because it was time for everybody to get sworn in, and again, I was just and they're all standing there, taking this promise. Like, what are they actually promising? Because they're not promising to obey the written Constitution.
Not when they go along with the courts.
Yeah.
Interpretative.
And it's like, I promise to do whatever the state Supreme Court tells me to do.
Well, when I swore that oath, my belief was that I was swearing to do what I believed it said. Not anything about a judge or anything like that. But I
Right.
know what you mean, though.
Yeah.
That it ultimately plays out a very different way.
Yeah,
In a
because
very
if you pick up the document and says, okay, first of all, Article 3, I can't violate any of your rights except to protect your other rights, and you look at 98% of what the state is doing, and it doesn't do that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So what are you supposed to do? And nobody, very few people, you would probably be one of them, would look at that and say, we're not supposed to be doing any of this.
Right. Right.
But most people are, well, we're already doing it, so let's see if we can fix it or trim it or tweak it.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what's going on with Claremont and Conval now. Is they're like, well, how can we change the numbers a little, or we'll change the way the taxes go from here to there, and you're miles from the actual issue.
No.
You know?
Well, that really is that seems to be a strategy, the classic hustler, is to just get you thinking about something else, thinking the problem is something different from what it is.
Yes.
And then before you know it, you don't know how to even make the bet, so to speak.
Right. And so you haven't actually solved the problem.
Yeah.
And so and that's the first thing, right? Is we should all agree on what the problem is.
By the way, that's the first time I've used the word hustler to describe the courts.
Okay. Well,
You put that in my mind. I don't remember reading your book, but you might have. Maybe you'll do it in the future. Okay. So Hughes said, this is a fun one. Hughes said, and this is Chief Justice Charles Evan Hughes. You said, this is your full quote. The other day I was leafing through an annotated edition of the U.S. Constitution when I came across a remarkable quote from Chief Justice Charles Evans Hughes. Hughes said, "We are under a Constitution, but the Constitution is what the judge says it is."
yes.
Now that was very close to what Rich Lehman was saying when he was asked directly,
Okay.
who should have the last word? He said, well, somebody's going to have the last word. And my point to him is, it's the people, if anybody.
If
It
anybody,
isn't
yes.
a court.
But
because
the
we know this, right?
Yeah.
So-
Whoever has the last word, if somebody has the last word, then they are basically the legislature and the executive, and they are the whole government.
So the one who gets to interpret it.
Yeah, nobody gets the last word.
That sounds like, I hate to say it with Bob, but what I see in the Catholic world is that thing. It's a very weird little world where the Pope has the last word, including over who God says he is.
Right, although in theory, God is talking through the Pope. So God has the last word, and the Pope is just his instrument.
Except we can plainly see the courts. Maybe they would tell you that God has the last word too, but they're his intermediaries. They're wearing black dresses after all.
Right, yeah. And so, one of my books is called, it's a bunch of sort of advertisements, one-page advertisements about schools and school spending, and one of them, the title is, it's like, here's the Pope, infallible, here's the judges, unaccountable, right? And they're acting like they're the Pope. They're like, whatever we say goes because we say it, right? Which is just a completely untenable way to do anything. That's just crazy.
Yeah.
But everybody takes it for granted. That's exactly, okay, the court said it, so I guess it's true.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I mentioned to you that I really like about our founders is the idea of the self-evident and the idea that we hold these things to be true because of our internal awareness games that we play. These are young men, actually, and who probably were in that zone of waking themselves up already, having heard whatever nonsense. And of course, a lot of America was running away from the papacy and stuff.
So it's funny, I probably used to think of self-evident in that sense, more it's a thing that everybody would find the same thing. But after actually studying math and teaching math for a long time, one of the things I learned was that self-evident just means it doesn't depend on anything. There is still a certain amount of arbitrariness there. And so in mathematics, you say it's self-evident that these 5 axioms are true.
Okay.
But if you choose some other self-evident axioms, you get different results, right?
Yes. Well, yes, right.
But self-evident to me now means we're choosing these. This is our choice. We choose to believe that people have rights. We choose to believe that government should operate by. That's a choice. Yeah. There are other choices you can make.
Yes, right.
Right.
No, but we are talking about principles of liberty, and on that, given that.
Yes, and so if
we
you
accept
start,
certain
if you start from liberty, these things are self-evident.
Yes, that is a
too.
truthful thing. I get what you're saying.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
I stand corrected even.
But it was sort of one of those waking up moments for me when I just thought, and I have a book about that too, where I went through this whole thing where I was like, this is just the way it is, and these are the rules, and this is, and then.
Well, it's one of those things when I'm teaching painting, I have to say to people, some people will say, and have numbers of times said to me, don't we all wind up at the same place? We have a model sitting in front of us. Don't we all wind up at the same place? And I said, we don't wind up at the same place if we don't have the same motives.
Right,
We really don't. So if you're even going to study with me, you should look at my work and say, is that my world? Is that the world I want to be participating in?
Yeah.
But there is then a certain amount of, it'll be, if you want to achieve this, there's a certain amount of self-evidence that you'll have to do some of these things. Some of these things will make that work for you well.
Right.
And you have some evidence that that's true with the person next to you,
Yeah.
et cetera. So I get it. That's very clear.
But it is, to me now, it is sort of the essence of deduction is you choose some things, and there's nothing that leads you to them.
Yes.
That's where you start, because you have to have a place to start.
Absolutely, that's right.
So,
Archimedes, right? Yes.
And that's what makes them self-evident instead of evident from something else.
Yeah.
Right? And so this is a thing,
The givens are there,
Yeah.
Yeah, so you do wonder about the givens of judges, don't you, at some point? You wonder if they have a different idea about liberty or about our country?
I think they have a different idea of what their job is. I think they have a different idea of do the ends justify the means? I mean, that's sort of a starting place. Do the ends justify the means? And if we disagree on that, we're not going to end up anywhere near each other.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's, and there are these little things that follow from the ends justify the means. They're not self-evident, but should we punish, how often should we punish innocent people, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, never.
Yeah.
But if you think the ends justify the means, well, then your answer is
collateral
something like,
damage, et cetera,
not too much. We shouldn't do it too much.
Yeah.
And if you're a judge and you are on that side of that question,
Right.
your entire approach to the law is going to be different from somebody who is on the side that
question.
So there's a thing I wrote that I've been referencing a lot, which is the idea of majority rule, and this sort of relates to the legislature getting together. And so what finally occurred to me, it takes a long time for me to finally, oh my God, why didn't you see
Unlike
this
the rest
before?
of us who are so brilliant.
Unlike the rest of us, it just everything occurs to them. I'm still catching up. But one day I was just thinking about, okay, so majority rule is there's a question behind majority rule, which is how many of us should there be in order for us to get our way? Mm-hmm. And the answer to that always looks like a half, 2/3,
Sure.
3/4, 3/5, whatever.
Sure.
But you can turn that on its head and say, how many people should we be allowed to screw to get our way?
Yeah.
And if you ask it that way, the answer should be 0, right? Which
Exactly.
leads you directly to consent and unanimity.
Yes.
Where you don't just say, well, we want this and we don't care about you. It's like, let's keep figuring out until we have something that works for everybody. And then that should become the law.
You tickled me. But you have a majority of 5 judges.
Right.
Oh my!
Okay.
Never mind the majority in the House of 400 guys. Never mind
400.
the whole town.
Or even the fact
state.
that there's nobody down there representing me.
That's right.
There's.
I didn't vote for any of you guys.
And I don't agree with anything that they're trying to do. They're not representing me. They're representing me the way my friend Neil represents his farm animals.
Well,
it's like you're a resource for me to use.
You can take us into dark territory on that point. Yeah. So I'm going to talk about points. You made some points. You suggested some points, and I'm really interested in your story or your reading of all this junk. And you've watched some of our videos. I think you said some of these came out of the looking at the Moscow one, where I was a little bit strident, and I'm such a calmer guy today in this video because you're here, right? In Article 3, this is your point, so I'm going to let you take it where you want to get, okay? And understand, folks, what I'm doing here is I'm talking to people. We have a broad body of people out here who agree with me, and they're coming from all sorts of different places and backgrounds. I mean, places intellectually or whatever, and backgrounds. So, but I think it's hugely important for our viewers to know that, to know where I don't have a little church down there about the anti-oligarchy church, or anything like that. And you're not baptized in my church, so I'm valuing you as part of the public. And so what I'm trying to do is get to your points, okay? And your reactions to this stuff. So you said at this one point in Article 83, the word cherish is much less important than the word and. If words like and all can change their meaning when a judge wants them to, their laws, which are made of words, don't mean anything at all. Now, you said that. Do you want to go into that, the writing of that, where he says that? Do you want to talk about that specifically? Or
That's just something that I've said. I personally, when I hear...
That's a general idea.
That's my reaction to people who will say, they'll start talking about cherish.
Yeah.
Like Dan had said, I think, spent 10 minutes on cherish.
Yeah.
Just, well, what does cherish mean? It could mean this, and it's the legislators who cherish, or the legislature. And so that, to me, is in the weeds. What gets passed over there is the fact that whatever cherish means, and I tend to just express it this way. Suppose we replace cherish with zerbal.
Yeah.
The legislators shall zerbal, seminaries and public schools. Okay, I don't need to, whatever zerbal means, whatever cherish means, it has to be the same for both of those, seminaries and public schools. You can't just say, oh, well, I can't fund a seminary, and I can't operate a seminary, and I can't regulate a seminary, but I can do all those things for public schools. That is getting to the heart of what language is. That's Lewis Carroll again.
Yes.
The word "and" means whatever I want it to
So
mean.
you're saying in that decision, they just discarded the fact that seminaries should be funded now.
Yes.
If they're right about the schools.
Do one or do both or do neither.
That's what I want people to hear.
Yeah.
The self-obvious, the self-evident
Right.
lack of logic.
And I think this, and just the language itself.
Is that a good use of a self-evident?
Yeah. The language itself is, you've had this language forever, and things like all. When you say all, you mean all. You don't mean 90%. You don't mean 51%.
And you don't
mean
make
all.
exceptions. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you don't want to use the word all, don't put the word in something like a constitution.
Yeah.
Because you're supposed to have thought through that thing and figured out, well, what if there are some people who shouldn't have guns? You know what? That's more trouble. That will cause more problems. So we're just going to say all.
Yeah.
Congress should make no law, not some laws, not necessary laws, right? And then in other places, and this is one of the things I think people don't see, they're like, well, no right is absolute. And it's like, no, let's look at, say, Amendment 1 of the federal Constitution. Right. You don't have the right to assemble. You have the right to assemble peaceably. Right. And there's a distinction, right?
Sure.
In the Third Amendment, you don't have the right to say, no soldiers in my house. It's like, you can say that unless we're at war and a law has been passed, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
You don't have the right to refuse all searches. You can refuse searches where there's no warrant based on probable cause. So it's not like the people who wrote these documents didn't understand the difference between not and not unless.
Yes.
Right? That's
really
my problem. It's like,
really good point.
Look at those things. It's in the same document, the Bill of Rights. They're right there next to each other.
Right.
And clearly they knew what they were doing. And so to say, this cracks me up to say, well, are you saying that they were not as good a writer as you are?
Right.
Are they not as smart as you and they accidentally did that? Or
Yes.
did they do it on purpose and you're ignoring it?
Well, the sad thing is we have to presume they think they're smarter than everybody. I mean, it's a sad thing for them because it puts them in a really bad light.
Right. And so I my thing would be to get them to admit it and say, yeah, I'm actually smarter than James Madison. It's okay, good.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Good, thank you for saying that.
You could have built this, yeah.
Yeah.
No,
yeah.
I don't think so, yeah.
So, but that's what I'm getting at there is like people focus on, like right now there's a whole thing about uniform taxes. And so you get out your state constitution, you look for the word uniform. It appears nowhere, right? And then somehow they go beyond a uniform tax, as I've understood it from like the Federalist Papers, would be we need this much money, there's this many people, divide, right?
Right.
We need $1 million, and there's 1,000 people. You each pay 1,000. That would be a uniform tax. So then they just slip in. You have to have a uniform tax rate, and that's what's constitutional. It's like it has nothing to do with the Constitution. It's not anywhere in there.
Right.
And you've gone several steps past what's there to
very-
the point where everybody is arguing about things that don't matter and forgetting.
Because they shouldn't be there in the first place.
And forgetting the little things that they slipped in there that do matter.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. That's
So
right. That's very good.
Yeah. So like Article 3, it's like nobody pays attention to that I cannot violate any of your rights except to protect your other rights. Yeah. And so to me, the first thing the legislature should be doing when somebody comes in and says, let's have a law to do this, is you should be able to look at that and say, show me the direct line. I mean, here it's clear how we're violating people's rights. We're taking their money, we're making them do paperwork, we're stealing time from their lives, whatever. Show me how there is this deal over here. What right am I protecting and how am I protecting it? And nobody would even think to do that. I think if you went in and suggested that to the general court, they would just laugh and say, we don't need to do that. And it's like, that's literally your job.
Well, we've been doing that forever.
Right.
We've been taxing you forever without...
Your job
without a
is
discussion.
literally to ask that question. That's what it says. So you don't want to ask it, or you don't know how to ask it, or it's too much trouble to ask it, right? And you don't know which of those because nobody's ever asking them, why are you not doing this? Right? They're just, well, we're just doing what we did last year.
As much as that's lame, it's one of the things that makes me crazy is how many people in Congress are lawyers. And I'm going to read one of your points here. Training for being a lawyer, i.e. learning how to get around the law, is exactly the wrong training for a judge. And I'm saying to the public, you're witnessing judges do exactly that. The Constitution has plain language, and they are making crap up. Anybody who uses their own good eyes, well, you got to believe me or your judge's lying eyes, right, the other way around. But anyway, but so you make that point. Go.
Yeah, and
elaborate.
So this is, the way you get to be appointed as a judge is you're a successful lawyer. Mm-hmm. And you are a successful lawyer to the extent that you do not let the law get in the way of your clients, even if they're wrong.
It's called success for your client.
Yes. Yeah. Your job is literally to twist things so that your client appears to be in the right, even if he's not.
If he just murdered somebody, yeah.
And so in other words, the job of a lawyer is to say, here's the result I want. How can I pick and choose precedents, and I'll ignore the laws I don't want, pick the laws I do, to justify that result?
So you run this little line of plausible logic. Yeah.
And that is exactly the opposite of what you want in a judge who would say, here are the 5 or 6 or 8 principles that we're starting from, and if I move away from those principles, I either get to that thing or I get to not that thing, or sometimes I get no answer at all, and I just can't say. Yeah. That's what you want. Yeah. And you get the opposite. Yeah. So this is just because judges and lawyers have taken over the profession of the law.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, the bar is a sick thing.
And so why would they let anybody else in who isn't playing that game? But it's astonishing to me that it is exactly the wrong training. It's not what you want. Yeah. So that's something that I think.
I always wonder whether the guys. I think it was Jefferson who studied just with some guy. Maybe even what's his name too, Lincoln, but it was some guy in town. It was the lawyer. But I'm wondering if that guy was teaching them how you circumvent the law, or was he teaching them the law? You get the impression he was teaching the law.
Well, but again, it's like you can learn what the law is, but what people pay you for is not. So if I go to a lawyer, I don't want him to tell me you're wrong.
Right.
I want him to tell me how can I look like I'm right.
Exactly.
And so if a judge, what you've got now is a situation where a judge will sit down and say, here's the result I want.
Right.
And not here's where the law should take me.
And then wanders his way through to find a plausible. Yeah. The word plausible deniability came up. This JFK information coming up nowadays.
Yes.
But way back when, was it Mark, what is his name, wrote the book called Plausible Deniability.
Yeah.
But talking about how they'd done that kind of a thing. But it's a fairly routine thing now, is what you're talking about, is that the courts have done that just in this case here. They're basically saying, I can find a place over there, you try to beat me at it. Yes. And somebody said, I think Mosca said, and who's going to beat them? It's in their court.
Right, it's in their court.
Nobody's going to be able to resist them in their court. It's an interesting thing because the general court's also a court, and it used to dissolve those kinds of courts when people are going rogue like that. But these guys have gone rogue in relation to the Constitution.
Well, they have, and so Randy Barnett has written some interesting books about, and he clarified for me this idea that any judge can get any result he wants. And for me, I came at it from mathematics, which is you introduce a contradiction into a logical system, and you can prove anything and its opposite. Yeah. But he actually talked about the technique.
We have to talk about painting sometime.
So he actually talked about the technique, which is that the judge will characterize something. Mm-hmm. Oh, is this a free speech issue, or is this a drug enforcement issue, or is it a this issue? And depending on how he chooses to characterize it, he'll get the answer he wants, okay?
Yeah.
And so this relates to Claremont because fairness, if it's going to be about anything, should be everybody gets the same education. And the judges recharacterized it as a money issue.
Yes.
And so now everybody
gets the same support financially.
Everybody talks about money, as if that has anything to do with it. And all the evidence suggests that money has absolutely nothing to do with it.
As we just spoke of.
But having characterized it that way, now they're free to make up whatever they want and say, well, here's the obvious thing is we have to spend the money this way. And, and we have to teach this. There's no mention of learning. There's lots of mention of teaching. There's no mention of learning.
That's interesting.
Right?
Isn't it?
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
You look through all the statutes, you look at all the Department of Education stuff. There used to be one place where it said that kids actually had to learn something. They had to learn well. They had to get to proficiency on the state exams. And last year, Ruth Ward and Rick Ladd took it out of the law. It used to say schools shall have all students at proficiency in math and reading.
I won't ask you to judge motives. I mean, some of our friends don't like us to talk about motives. Why would somebody do that unless they were part of the establishment itself?
I mean, my God, imagine that somebody was going to hold you to that standard. Well, and I was actually trying to drum up support for people to go. And I started going to my school board meetings and say, why are you breaking the law? You know, when are you going to stop breaking the law?
Somebody got worried about you, man.
Yeah, somebody maybe did. And they're just like, okay, we'll just take this out. And they substituted this very mealy-mouthed thing about they'll do appropriate stuff according to whatever benchmarks. And it's like, it used to be so clear. Every kid's going to learn to read and do math. Okay. If you took that seriously, you could throw out everything else.
You throw out a lot of money wasted.
Yeah. So this is like me with the Declaration of Independence. If I threw out the Constitution, I threw out everything except the one sentence that says, government exists, men form government to protect their rights and they derive their just powers from consent. If you took that one sentence and took it seriously, it doesn't matter whether you have a Congress, it doesn't matter whether you have a president or a king or a general counsel or a dictator. But if you don't take it seriously, then no form of government is going to protect you from what we're undergoing now.
When I was a state rep, I was on the education committee, and I remember at one point they came into the committee because the kids weren't reading, and they were graduating illiterates.
Yeah.
And they wanted to have the kids now at age 3 in preschool or pre-preschool and all this crap. And I simply was asking, you know, of all these proponents, I said, you know, so you've had 12 years and you want 13 to teach somebody to read who can learn to read in 6 months? I mean, this isn't rocket science teaching somebody to read. And you guys want 13 years now. Help me with this. You know, just help me with this. But that's, you see, why shouldn't that be in law? I mean, where's my quid pro quo? They want to steal my money, as you like to put it.
Yeah.
They want my money, and they'll turn the old peoples out of their homes. They'll send them off to the old folks' home, or someplace where destitutes wind up. And all for what?
And
there's no trade, there's no quid pro quo. We don't get an educated kid.
Right.
And it's now taken out of the law, thank you, Mr. Ladd.
And the trade is supposed to be is to protect your rights, right? And so one of the books I have is like, you as a libertarian,
incrementally remove all of our rights out of the
yeah. Well, because now if you have kids who can't read and they can't do any math and they don't understand statistics and they don't understand reasoning and they don't understand rhetoric, you can lead them anywhere.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Oh yes, we must wear these masks and we must take these shots and we must take, you know, and you must have licenses to do A, B, C, and D. And it's like,
who does that serve when we educate people like that? It doesn't serve the next generation.
It serves people who want power. Yeah. It serves, you know, there are certain people who, and you see this not just in politics, but you'll see they're just people who like to feel like they're helping people, whether they're actually helping them or not, okay? And that drives people into, you know, I want to be a nurse because I want to help people. I want to be a police officer because I want to help people. I want to be a teacher because I want to help people. Now, are they actually helping? Maybe, maybe not, right? In many cases they are. In some cases they're actually doing harm. But that is a very human impulse to say, these people are too dumb to take care of themselves and they need my help.
Well, I remember, and this is, you might take this BO off track. My guess is you can bring us back on track after I tell you this. But I remember going as a high school junior or something like that into a gymnasium. We were told we should go over there because that's the careers, you know, they were having all these companies come in and present.
Yes.
And I remember I got about halfway through the door and I saw just bars came down. I just saw jail cells. I thought, in whose world? I already knew what my life was going to be. I was already interested in painting, and I couldn't get there from here because of the school system. Right. But it has nothing to do with the school. I shouldn't have been in the school. I mean, that's a real thing, you know. And it wasn't a trade school thing. But the point is, what we wind up doing, and a lot of people have made this criticism. The school system is just there for certain corporations, especially big ones and all that sort of stuff. I'm just being silly now, but routinely doing that. But wouldn't I love it, and this is me talking more like Dorothy Sayers and the trivium system, wouldn't I love it, though, if somebody was saying, watching us as individuals and saying, how can I, as a teacher now, or as a school system, saying, how can I get that kid into what he really loves and get him on track with the information he needs to succeed at that? Right. You know, never mind just everyday living so he's not a failure as a citizen.
Right. And And that's a great question. And where my problem with it is then people say, well, if I can get him there, let's make everybody pay for that. And it's like,
Well,
no,
that's
no,
all.
no, no, no,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
Now you're talking about the kid's happiness as opposed to what society needs from
Oh,
them,
no, yeah.
right?
But I'm talking about if you're going to have a system that isn't about me, and it's a free system. It's supposed to be about the individual.
Yes.
It's got to at least look like that.
Well,
but their failure in every possible
Right, but
way.
here's the thing: if I teach, if I can get you to the point where you can read proficiently, okay, and you've
Yes.
learned a little bit of reasoning, a little bit of logic, there are books.
You're on your own. You can do anything.
No, but I'm saying there are books. There are now websites. There are courses for people who
Absolutely.
will help you. You can read about how do I choose a career. You can read about how do I figure out what
You
I'm
young people
interested
listening,
in.
hear this,
Right?
Because it's real. Yeah.
There are people lined up to help you with this for free who will be like, what is your passion? Here's some questions you can ask yourself. Go out and try these things. Do these things. Find out when.
Yeah, you're just saying it's not a money thing at all.
Yeah, it's
anymore.
not a money thing at all.
Not
but
at all. Yeah.
So the thing that
But
kids.
that's just establishing the system and making sure that everyone gets paid in the system for being a good part of the system. Yeah.
Right, but where Claremont kind of comes into it is then you start thinking in terms of what would be good for the kids. And that's charity, right? And so you've got Article 10 that basically says you can't take money from everybody to give it to some people.
We're gonna pause on that one and tell them just, they can read Fairness in Rethinking Fairness in Education. It's a really good read.
Yeah. Which is maybe of the things I've written my favorite, just because it really gets to this question of what would it look like if what we said was every kid should get the same education? That would look completely different than what we have.
Never mind though, but the courts are doing something different. It just has to do with money. It's all about the money. That's
Right,
all.
and it's then the courts are actually, and this is sort of relates to everything we've been talking about. The courts, rather than saying, what authority do we have and what purpose are we supposed to be pursuing, they will turn that question into what would be good for the kids and the parents.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And
the
daycare is good for the parents, and football and whatever is good for the kids, and they're all happy and everybody's good, and they're not learning to read.
Yeah.
And that actually works for the courts and the politicians and the people who want to run people's lives because they become dependent on you.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of my favorite weird things that happened was, so in New Hampshire, there's always these questions about who should be allowed to vote and should you be able to come in, and say, I don't have an ID, or let me fill out an affidavit. And we got a court ruling that actually said the affidavits that college students were being required to fill out an affidavit in order to say, yes, I should be voting here. And that was struck down by a judge who said, it reads too much like a statute. They shouldn't be required. We shouldn't expect them to be able to understand that. And I was just like,
wow, yeah.
Let's just apply that to everything.
Yeah.
Let's just invalidate all statutes because by definition, they read like statutes. Nobody should be able to understand anything, right?
That's a very good point.
And this is such a remarkable, it's hard to get into somebody's head and go, what else would I have to believe to actually utter that kind of a sentence?
Yeah. No, you actually are carrying it out to the absurd end, and it's exactly what we have to do.
And that's Lewis Carroll, it's absurd. And you read the stuff and you're just like, okay, well, it's a good thing that's fiction, but it's not. We're living in it.
So you make this point. The issue isn't how do we fix Claremont. The issue is how do we get from the rule of judges back to the rule of law.
Exactly.
Go for that. We're talking about it. I know
So that is, we now have this situation where, like I said, and like I've written, the law is not in the law. The law is in the judges, right?
Yes.
And that's not acceptable.
And so you're saying, how do we get back to where it isn't in the
Yes,
judges?
this is the question. If you solve this question, then Claremont is solved as a byproduct of that.
Okay.
Right? So if you actually look at things like, and there are lots of ways you might do it. I mean, one of them is to make a clear distinction between, a statute is not a starting point for common law propagation of new legal principles. A statute is something where it's like the rules of baseball where you say, okay, you're inside or you're outside, you're safe or you're out.
Okay.
That's one thing you could do. I mean, one of the things you could do is just take seriously the idea that if somebody comes in and one side is arguing you broke the law and the other side says you didn't, and the judges are split, say 3-2 or 5-4 or even 8-1, what that means is either those guys
Can't even agree on it. Yeah.
Yeah, either they are trying to pull a fast one because they think you can get away with it, or that law really is too vague to be enforced.
Right.
And you should just send it back, you know?
Yeah. That's a term everybody should know that you brought out, the void for vagueness.
Oh, yeah.
That
So
it really is a massively important.
And I think it's a huge wedge if it's used correctly and if people actually start saying, you can't enforce this because you guys can't even agree.
But these guys here have created vagueness, actually. It's beyond
They've
the void
done
for
it,
vagueness of the
right.
Constitution. They've actually created a phenomenon in themselves.
Yes, and they can get away with it because nobody, how many people could you meet on the street who would actually recognize the void for vagueness is it's got a pedigree to it.
Yeah, it's a legal term.
It's a legal term, and it has been used. I mean, I think Justice Gorsuch, not too long ago, actually struck something down just saying, there's no way you can know how to actually implement this law or how to enforce it. So it's out of here. Yeah. So those are the kinds of things that you could do where you just, you have to take seriously the idea that if a bunch of people get together, 10 people have 12 different interpretations of what a law means, and that's a terrible law, right? And when you do that, I think one of the things you would start is peeling back, where the reason people aren't agreeing on what it means is because people are then using the law as a kind of club to beat other people into doing things they don't want to do.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? That's why people are disagreeing. Nobody's disagreeing about whether you should murder somebody.
Yep.
There's no disagreement. There's no court cases. Yep. There's nothing about that. They are disagreeing about, should you be able to smoke pot? It's because a lot of people, they're like, who are you to tell me I can't? Yeah. So as soon as you start using law in that way, then you run into this problem where now people are going to disagree. People are trying to use it to force things on other people. Right. And now your job as a lawyer is to find the right judge or to make the right argument so that you can get away with something, or from the other side, so you can force somebody to do something you shouldn't be doing in the first place. So those are all they're abstract ideas, right? And we start with, the question of who should get the final say. Yeah. And the way you ask the question, right? So one of my favorite quotes is from Charles Kettering, who said, he's from Sloan Kettering, and he said, a problem well posed is half solved. And the flip side of that is a problem that's not well posed will probably never be solved because you don't even know what you're trying to do. So just to ask the question, who should get the final say, implies that the answer is somebody. Whereas if you ask the question differently and say, when there is substantial disagreement about what something means, what should you do? Now, there are lots of other possibilities that don't involve anybody getting to say, you shall do what I say, and that's the end of it, right?
Can you take that straight into Claremont use that in Claremont
so,
in a way? Give us an example of how that... I'm not sure how to phrase that, except I want to apply it.
So in Claremont, they, like I already said, they turned the question from one of achievement into one of money, right? And they took a question about, instead of asking the question, if we are commanded to protect competition by eliminating monopolies, how would we do that? And they don't like that question. Yes. What they changed it into is, how can we take some vague idea of fairness and impose it on people so that they have to do what we want?
Hence you're saying that this is malice, forethought.
I'm from the government, I'm here to help, right? Is that malice? Sometimes it's well-intentioned, but just...
No, of course.
So Justice Brandeis said something like, the worst thing, the real evil is people who mean well but won't leave everybody else alone. They're the ones who do all the damage in the world. That's right, And this is an example of that. They mean, I'll even give it to them that they mean well, and they see the pictures of a broken chalkboard, and they feel bad for the kids, and you can feel bad for the kids. But it is not your job to pretend that the Constitution says something other than it does so that you can make some people give money to pay for that. That is not your job.
No. This reminds me of, in my field in painting, we have what we call a piecemeal approach. In other words, if you see the big picture, you're not going to get lost in the little stuff. Right. And but you can tell when a painter hasn't got that, when he lacks the big picture. And so what you're saying, though, by implication, if nothing else, is you're saying the courts are little men. They lack this capacity to see the big picture, which includes the nature of a free society. And then with all the things you're talking about, I mean, I'd love to have them go to your class, so to speak, but they seem to lack something, and it seems to be much more about power and what you can get away with and junk like this, as you said, in the very nature of what their job is, job description, whatever you call it.
So,
you
the
feel what I'm saying?
lack the capacity is sort of pejorative. I don't know that they lack the capacity. These are all clearly very smart
people. You've got to do that one way or the other.
Right, and I would be more inclined to say they have the capacity and are choosing not to exercise it, because they think something else is more important.
So they're not big people, though. And you could, some people say they're time servers, or they're just serving their neighbor, their local neighbor, who they happen to want to do some favors for,
right.
or their daughter who's a school teacher.
But see, so again, I would bring it back to
doesn't look good.
There are these very, very basic ideas, and it's funny because you can actually find many of them in children's books, right?
Yeah.
You teach children the ends don't justify the means. It doesn't matter if you want that kid's doll. You can't just go take it from him.
Right.
Yes, and that means you will be unhappy for a while, but you just can't do this. And then we forget this, right? We never act like that's true.
Application
and so do the ends justify the means? You can, if I were a judge, and I might take the position, I am taking the big picture. And what's important in the big picture isn't the adherence to little laws. It's how happy is everybody? Are we acting like our best selves? Are we being the kind of society that we should really be? Right. And this is where you get, people like Justice Sotomayor, who in her confirmation hearing was just saying, we just don't have enough sympathy for certain kinds of people. And it's like, that may be true, but that is not your job.
And again, that's the lack of awareness is a failure in the big picture sense.
But I'm saying she would say she is looking at the big picture. The bigger picture is our humanity.
Understand that I'm accepting that you're really generous toward them.
Yes.
do. We have to be generous toward our ill-meaning neighbors, greedy neighbors, all that sort of stuff. We have to assume the best thing.
I disagree with them.
But we keep an eye on them. We keep an eye on them and watch out for them and warn our neighbors that we don't know for sure that they're evil and evil, but they keep your cat keeps disappearing.
Yeah, so I disagree with them, and I would start from different premises, but then ultimately for me, there in one of the books I mentioned, something where it's just like there's something I call the resource problem.
Okay.
Which is some people have things they're trying to accomplish that require them to use other people as resources. I need your time, I need your money, I need you to do something or not do something, or go somewhere or not go somewhere. So I need to treat you as a thing in order to get the goal I want. Yeah. And so my big issue is, what framework can you have where the people who want to treat other people as resources and the people who don't can live together without killing each other?
Yeah.
That to me is the question, right? And the answer that comes up is things like consent and rights. The people who want to treat each other as resources can group together into smaller communities and exploit each other as much as they want.
Yeah. I allow that you have some good theories in that direction,
But this is Claremont. Claremont is saying we, the judges, want to be able to treat everybody who happens to own a piece of land as a resource. Yeah. And we can take your money and we can do what we think is the kind-hearted.
Not that the legislature would ever do that.
No. Well, the legislature just does it because the judiciary says you must do this, and they're like, oh, okay, I guess we have to, right? Yeah. And that's the system we're in, where everybody just goes, they get the final say.
You have the final say. You have about 2 minutes. That's just the way it works in some of these when you have a limit to an hour. One thing you mentioned, you said we're unmasking the possibility of law by creating contradictions that make deductive reasoning impossible. Right. Any judge can start from any result in any case. You've said all this stuff already, and then cherry pick rationalizations. My question, my point I made, and you didn't see that one, but I just was thinking of Robert Frost, that good fences make good neighbors. Mm-hmm. And so we have to figure out how to keep the fences up between us and people like that. And you started hinting a little bit, just that section about that moment. And
so that, to me, so I used to be all about rights, and I would be rights this and rights this. And now rights is a useless word because, I have the right to free speech, but I also have the right to dental care. I have the right to keep and bear arms, but I also have the right to safe spaces where my feelings aren't hurt, right? So it's like,
So it's an
you've
relevant term now.
confused rights and entitlements and wishes to such a degree. So now I actually prefer the idea of consent.
Yeah.
Because that hasn't been ruined yet, okay? And there are just some examples you can use, like, okay, how many people would we have to get together to vote to take one of your kidneys if you don't want to give it to us?
Yeah.
And it's like, there isn't a majority big enough. Consent it now still
So
means...
let's take that right away. We got that quickly, because you're very effective at that. But so take it to Claremont.
Okay.
Again, just every time. If you can. Yeah.
So
end it with that.
Yeah. So in the context of Claremont, you should have the ability to say no. You know, if somebody goes, I need you to pay for textbooks for my kids, and you should be able to say no.
Okay. You're talking about the guy coming to grab your property.
Yes, they're coming to grab your property, and they're saying basically, you either give it to us, or we'll take your house, and if you don't leave your house, we'll kill you.
We're gonna have to save this for another one. You end on a note that's full of juice.
Yeah, but that's you should have that ability, and you know, in one of the books about Croydon, right? I'm talking about it never even occurred to them, to the parents and the people who wanted this, to say, we'll put up our own money.
Yeah.
And we'll just leave you guys out of it.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that would be nice.
Yeah.
You know, instead they accuse the people who don't want to pay of using force. You're forcing us to do this. And it's like, no, what we're trying to do is not let you force us to do something.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the language has become so corrupted that you can't even have these discussions.
You so tempt me to say more and more.
Well,
we drag you more and more. But
no,
we can keep talking now, but we got to get off this for the sake of the hour-long show. And the card only lasts so long for things like that. So
no, I appreciate the opportunity to have a discussion with somebody who isn't looking at me like I'm from Mars.
Yeah,
you know, like, what the hell?
Well, you might be from Mars. NASA's pretty close to Mars lately.
Yeah,
so
it is. And sometimes I feel like I tell a lot of the kids I deal with that I'm an alien, and they are not entirely convinced that I'm lying.
Yeah. I do appreciate you doing this, and you know. It's clear in my mind that what we need is a lot more clear in our minds. You're definitely the apostle of mental clarity. I really appreciate what you're doing.
Patron saint of clarity.
I'll go ahead and recommend one more time for your sake and the interest of our state that you guys consider getting bare minimum books. Go online, bareminimumbooks.com, and you're going to find a whole stack of these are very readable. I mean, the pages are like 4 lines long.
Yeah.
And it's essentially it's an article length thing that you're doing.
It's a talk.
Like an
Each
essay.
one of these started out as a talk, which may have been 15 minutes. It may have been 40 minutes.
Very readable.
Yeah,
very readable. You can get through the information,
right.
And it's very fundamental. I was treating you badly by calling you a fundamentalist the other day, but I wasn't really. I was being cute. But it is a real thing. We need more of it.
I think we need more
the fundamental
fundamentalists.
nature of man, of government and all this stuff.
Yes,
so
the people who aren't fundamentalists who cause all the problems.
I know, they're living in the weeds. Or
let's take the middle way where nobody knows what anybody's doing, and you know, whatever you can get away with is what's right.
Thank you, Ian Underwood, for being here.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Maybe we'll do this again. I'd like to.
I would love to. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sort of trying to figure out how to focus the kind of conversation you have. It's so different from the one I just had with the state rep and or with a lawyer like Mosca.
Yeah.
I'm eager to flesh this out because every one of us, as I said, has a problem with being defrauded of our rights to representation as the lead for any spending of our money and any policy that's going to become law. So it's really atrocious. We all agree, and we're after you. So enjoy the show. Thank you very much anyway.
Thank you.
If you're as concerned as we are with the loss of the legislature's control over policy and taxation in New Hampshire and wish to help, please share these podcasts with as many people as you can, and then consider donating so we can bring you and your friends even more of the important facts concerning our Supreme Court's Claremont decisions.